And so we get all of the raw materials, the tubes you need to build the frames with. And they go into milling and they cut them down, they weld them, they paint it, we have somebody inspect it, and then we ship the bike frames off to the next person who's going to use the bike frames, right? And this could be Trek or somebody, right, to go and build the actual bikes and ship to the customer. And you'll notice here is that if I look at the process, you can see that it drives traffic for people to buy flights and cars and hotels from our company. And we went to all the teams and all the stakeholders inside of IT operations. We're like, we need to do this in 2 weeks. How long can we do it in? And IT operations came back and said, it's going to be at least 6 weeks. And the business was like, that's unacceptable. We need them in 2 weeks. Find a way to get them. And the next person, and the next person. And finally, when everybody's over capacity and overflowing with work, then can things actually finally flow out of the system, right? And what you really want is a flow like this. Right? Because if you're going to push water through something, you need and supply the right amount. So there was this idea was that essentially what it says is that as demand increases, the consumption, as the availability of coal rises, so like basically these numbers, and we're generating all this data, and now that we're generating all this data, we have to do something with it, and thus our demand for compute power has increased greatly because it's now easier to get compute power. So as demand increases, demand's increasing like this, as we've kind of went through this process of mainframe, client server, data center, developers are basically shoveling code out the door very quickly. And we're seeing this increasing velocity from the development side of the house, right? Developers are moving much more quickly. And really what ended up happening was it was a really kind of a perfect storm for IT operations and operations people. Because if you think of it, what ended up happening was ops had these two. And so when you look at the definition of rogue, a dishonest or unprincipled person, now that's pretty harsh, right? To say like just because somebody's going out to Amazon and subverting operations who can't keep up because they haven't changed their behavior, you're calling them a dishonest or unprincipled person. Advisory board, easier. Some people are nodding their head in the back. Then we would execute the change. We would remediate the errors, and then if there were errors, we would fix them, because most of the times in these models, changes aren't extremely successful. And then we'd finally close the change. Does this reflect anybody's comment? It's disjointed, so disjointed means that if I look at this other process, these are disjointed from one another and that they don't flow well together. And it's task-focused, right? So IT operations for a very long time has been focused on performing a task on a system, right? And by what that means is basically I go to somebody can do a code review and says, yep, looks good to me, it follows our best practices, or because I can have automation automatically running tests for me, Jenkins could actually do the code review for me, and then somebody can actually merge the change, and then we test again, then we promote it, then we test again, then we test again, right? So it's this constant state of testing, 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 much like we've been doing in development, right? And now we have these two different environments, and we're testing and staging, and we push it to production, and we're like, why does it behave completely different, right? And because in this model where we start in development and move it through, up and through the life cycle, we actually have a much higher degree of certainty that development is actually the same as production. Is that the processes were always seem to be bolted on, right? The processes were always put in place because we broke something in production, right? And they're put in place and they're basically there as a stop guard or a safeguard to keep us from doing bad things. Now in this, we're actually have the processes move faster. How can I have equal velocities through my different teams? And some of the ways that we can do this, kind of other ways outside of just adopting the software development lifecycle in operations. So there's this acronym called CLAMS. So it stands for Collaboration, Lean, Automation, Measurement, and Sharing. And so basically when we look at what we're trying to do in our work, 25 kilometers, or am I doing things like increasing the amount of oxygen that I can actually use and my body can use? Is my muscle mass getting better? Those are the actual parameters that matter as a runner, right? Not necessarily how much time did I utilize on my treadmill. So are we measuring the right small batches, changing little bits to move the needle and to improve a little bit at a time instead of these large batches of work that operations typically tries to do? And then also A/B testing, right? So do we want to know if we're measuring all the time? What's cool about this is if I have lots of compute power that's easily and readily accessible and I measure that, and he would tie it to a tree. And then he could go and meditate and he would have no problem, right? He'd finish his meditation and he would go untie the cat from the tree. Well, the guru started getting followers and other people that would meditate and pray with him. And every day they would guide, and you're kind of stuck and going on that road. But you got to get out of the rut to actually turn the vehicle and change, right? And this is the first part of actually doing that, is questioning everything around you. And so shout out to Justin Arbuckle, who's our VP of Europe at Chef. But he has a good talk. I invite you to go look at it.
Synchronizing the velocities and the pace of delivery across the two teams.
Yep.
You know, that's really hard. Have you got any other tips on how to do that? Particularly if you know they're not delivering at the same pace to start with.
Yeah, so typically what works best, so we talk about small incremental changes being best. I talked about that as like so much better. And now they're actually taking people from that team, and they basically take people from that team and then embed them in other projects to spread the knowledge and spread the behavior, and then those people move on to other projects to improve it. So, yeah. There was another question over here.
Okay.